Imagine, if you will, a sinister corporation that controls the fate of hundreds of millions of people. A dystopian company with its own private army 3 times larger than the official military of its home. Country using its influence to pressure and bribe politicians unchecked, all in pursuit of its boundless greed. No, we're not talking about Arasaka from the cyberpunk universe, nor modern-day giants like ExxonMobil or Samsung. This was a private company, founded in an age when wooden ships still sailed the oceans. One of the earliest joint stock companies in history. It began as a band of pirates and adventurers during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and by the time of Queen Victoria, it had become a monstrous corporation responsible for devastating and impoverishing the wealthiest and most populous continent on Earth. Welcome to the first episode in our series on the British East India Company. In this introductory chapter, we'll explore the company's origins, the foundations of its creation, and the early rise that would go on to reshape history and help define the contours of the modern capitalist world. What is the East India Company? Before we dive into the humble beginnings of the company, let us examine the devastating legacy it left behind. A legacy of organized violence in the name of commerce. Historically, it's well known that Britain colonized India and humiliated China during the 18th and 19th centuries, but what many don't realize is that this wasn't the work of the British state. It was a rogue private enterprise, the most dangerous company history has ever known. The British East India Company wasn't part of the British Army, the Royal Navy, or any official government body. It was an independent, profit-driven entity that minted its own currency, made its own laws, and waged wars with its own private army, one of the largest in the world. It was an empire within an empire, deeply intertwined with the history of British colonialism. It operated independently, occupying and ruling vast stretches of Asia. Unlike previous conquerors of India, who sought governance and administration, the company had only one goal: enriching its shareholders. It did so by looting India's wealth and funneling it into the hands of the elite in Britain, a cold island thousands of miles away. The catastrophe that befell Bengal, one of the most fertile regions on Earth, where over 10 million people died under the company's rule during a famine, is just one example of its cruelty. In China, the company was the spearhead of British aggression. It's flooding the country with opium and triggering a sweeping social collapse. India and China were once among the richest and oldest civilizations in the world. They still struggle to catch up with the West in technology, living standards, and global cultural influence. This decline was directly caused by the plundering of a single company that controlled more territory than many empires. The company's origins: since ancient times, Asia had been wealthier than Europe. India, China, and the Malay archipelago were centers of luxury goods like spices, silk, and porcelain. Trade between Europe and the East usually passed through Middle Eastern intermediaries, especially the Ottoman Empire, which controlled overland routes. In the late 15th century, Portugal broke this monopoly thanks to explorer Vasco da Gama, opened a sea route to India in 1498. This marked the beginning of global imperialism. Spain followed, and both countries enjoyed unprecedented wealth. England, at the time, was a poor nation suffering from political and religious isolation, looking for its share of the spoils. During Queen Elizabeth I's reign, English adventurers with limited state support began attacking Spanish ships and embarking on daring sea voyages to make contact with the rulers of the Spice Islands. But the English crown lacked the resources to fund these costly maritime ventures. The solution was a revolutionary idea at the time: the joint stock company. Thus, in 1600, the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies was born, later known simply as the East India Company. The first voyages on New Year's Eve of 1600. The company received a royal charter granting it a monopoly on trade between the Cape of Good Hope and the Strait of Magellan. Its first voyage was led by Captain Sir James Lancaster, who succeeded in securing trade agreements in the Malay archipelago and returned with enormous profits. Initially, the main competition was with the Portuguese, but over time, the Dutch, through their Dutch East India Company, emerged as the primary rival. Better financed and more organized, the Dutch eventually drove the English out of the Spice Islands. In Japan, fortunes were a bit better. The first English ship arrived in 1613, and the English samurai, William Adams, helped win the favor of Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. Still, the English were unable to establish a lasting presence and closed their trading post after a decade. Expanding into India's serious interest in India began in 1608, when the ship Hector docked at the port of Surat. But India was not a land without rulers. It was under the control of the mighty Mughal Empire, one of the world's greatest powers at the time. The company therefore sought to win the favor of the Mughal emperor, which it achieved in 1618 by securing permission to establish a trading post in Surat. From there, the company gradually expanded. It bought the city of Madras, and later acquired Bombay as part of Queen Catherine of Braganza's dowry to King Charles II. Though technically under Mughal authority, the company never ceased testing its limits. As in 1686, when it attempted to confront the Mughals militarily, the result was disastrous. The company was soundly defeated and forced to issue a public apology, the end of the beginning. By the early 18th century, 100 years after its founding, the East India Company had evolved from a speculative venture into a vast economic enterprise. But this was only the beginning of its most significant chapter. In 1707, the death of Emperor Aurangzeb marked the start of the Mughal Empire's decline. And with the lion falling, the rats no longer needed to hide. The political game had begun and the company was on the brink of transforming from merchant to conqueror.
Oh.
In the next installment of this series, we'll explore how this company managed to conquer the Indian subcontinent and turn it into its own private colony. Be sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay updated.